Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss the alternate paths that allow lawyers to engage their entrepreneurial spirits, connect their creativity to their careers, and distinguish themselves from others. I'm your host, Jeremy Richter. This episode is brought to you by ALPS, Legal Malpractice Insurance Made Easy. As the largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance, ALPS provides outstanding insurance products, claims handling by licensed attorneys with private practice backgrounds, and risk management resources to help your firm be successful. ALPS understands that being a lawyer is hard, and they want to help make it a bit easier. Their online application takes as little as 20 minutes to complete, so you can get back to what really matters. To find out more, visit alpsinsurance.com. Now, on to the interview. Maya Markovich is a startup founder, investor advisor, and legal transformation consultant. With her unique background spanning behavioral science, law, venture capital, and change management, she delivers next-generation technology, process, and business advice to those in the legal tech world. She was named one of 5 influential women of legal tech by ILTA in 2020, a woman leading legal tech by The Technologist in 2019, and an ABA Legal Technology Resource Center Woman of Legal Tech in 2018 for her work in encouraging, designing, and implementing the future of the legal profession around the globe. Maya, welcome to the show. That's quite an introduction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's so great to be here.
And my co-host today is MC Sangaila, who was previously on episode 16 of Lawyerpreneur, and she is now the host of the podcast, The Portia Project. So, MC, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for having me.
All right, Maya, I want to start with this. I was listening to a Freakonomics podcast episode in which the founder of Sun Microsystems, Vinod Khosla, was being interviewed, and he said something that, considering your background, I thought might be a good jumping off point for us with this conversation. He said, really hard things are the only things worth trying. Does that resonate with you? What do you think when you hear something like that?
I'm not really sure, to be honest, because for me, it would really depend what the hard thing is. If I feel very strongly about a wrong that needs to be righted, or an opportunity that I think is time sensitive and I'm the right person at the right time to do it, I'll jump in no matter how hard it may seem or how ambiguous the path to the goal might be. But, I'm also a very detailed oriented person when it comes to getting things done well. I don't think you can ignore the small things.
Oh, I definitely need more detail oriented people in my life because I am not that person.
Well, I think too, the question is, right, how do you define really hard? Like, is it that you like a challenge, or that the hard, sort of knotty, difficult problems are more interesting to solve? I think that's kind of the question of, like, how do you define really hard things?
That's true. It's all in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are approached with, let's say, some difficult thing, is that motivating for you to jump into the deep end of a project, or does that cause you to shy away from it?
I think privately I shy away from it. Internally a little bit, I don't think I could do that. But I've learned that the more I push myself, the better in jumping into the deep end. So I definitely, go towards those opportunities.
Well, some would say working for change within a legal framework, or within law firms that are notoriously slow to change, is potentially a really hard thing.
That's
but
true.
Maybe you don't see it that way.
Oh, no, it is.
All right. So Maya, when you and I met last year, we bonded over our affinity for behavioral economics, though yours is much more of a training than mine is, like a hobby listening to things and reading about it. So I wanted to talk about why and how behavioral economics can apply to lawyers and the law practice. But first, I think we should probably define the term, because I don't think it's something that most of us interact with regularly in the legal profession.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely coming to the fore a little bit more. I'm very encouraged by that. I would say, the definition of it really that I go with is it's the study of choice and judgment that's applied to economic principles. So it provides a unique insight into decision making and the factors that drive behavior. Market researchers, advertisers, public policy advisors, they all use, behavioral economics to predict and influence big and small behaviors every day. And legal professionals and change agents can use behavioral economics too.
Okay. So in your role, previously you were the chief growth officer at NextLaw. Now you're doing advising and consulting. How do you use that background in social sciences as a tool for the work that you do?
Yeah, so I mean, at NextLaw, I was responsible for a really wide range of high impact and external facing and internal innovation initiatives, all really working towards our mandate of changing the business and practice of law via technology. So anything from vetting legal tech startups for potential investment or brainstorming new solutions with Denton's attorneys, talking with clients on their legal workflow challenges, supporting global practice leaders on their innovation strategies, leading projects that were just increasing awareness and building skills and shifting mindset. Now, I'm consulting and advising legal tech and justice tech startups full time. And in both of those roles, I use my behavioral background every day because really nearly everything that people in this space are trying to accomplish requires effective collaboration with a broad and diverse set of stakeholders, all of whom have their own patterns and drivers and group and individual entities. So I'm always asking, what makes stakeholder feel that their work is valuable? What are their areas of responsibility? What resources do they have at their disposal? What do they feel is their professional identity? And then, to understand their answers and decisions, I apply behavioral economic principles. And in that, by sort of having that understanding as the groundwork, I can create and encourage better outcomes.
When I'm working, this may be result in a similar answer. When I'm working with a client and they want to have a collaborative relationship, and most of my clients are insurance companies and corporations who's, they've got claims. I'm doing insurance and corporate defense work, so it's things we're dealing with. How can I approach my relationships with my clients with behavioral economics, with social sciences principles in mind that will help us have a more effective relationship?
There's probably a very long answer to that question, but I would truly say that the short answer is it really all stems from putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Understanding, empathetically understanding their goals, their drivers, their what keeps them up at night. And so, without that, you really can't go any further. So I'll keep it short answer there.
No, I think that's great because empathy, we don't really focus on that. Certainly it's not something we focus on in law school. And if you're not trained up by the right people, it's not something that you are taught is an important part of your practice, but it really is indispensable when you're dealing with clients.
The most successful and popular lawyers definitely do it, I think.
And I guess to follow up on that, what for those who are saying, yeah, empathy, okay, I should, express some solidarity or empathize with whatever emotion my client might be feeling, in response to something that happened in litigation, for example. But maybe there's like a tangible example you can give about what does empathy look like if you're not very good at empathy or empathizing with people or with clients? Is there something you can do to like increase your empathy muscle or something like that?
Oh yeah, that's like an entire. I have done CLEs on this very
I figured
topic.
you had. That's why I was like, Maya knows about this. I was like, maybe there's like one or two like tips, that you could share, because I could just sense some listeners going, yeah, empathy. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do I do that?
Well, the key thing to remember is that this kind of thing is learned. And that it is not something that you're innately born with necessarily. and that, it's easy to kind of develop those muscles. I would say the key first step is listening skills. Building the ability to listen to an opinion, understand a point of view. You might not agree with it, but you can try to understand without passing judgment, and listen to and incorporate that, criticism and feedback. I think flexibility also, and that's something that you can kind of proactively, if you're, consider that, you're somewhat rigid in your decision-making processes, or if you've gotten that feedback, you know, taking the time to stop and be present in a moment of a decision-making moment when you're, deciding what to do next. And, with that, incorporating flexibility and understanding and appreciating, that there are multiple different perspectives.
Yeah, those are all good tips. And I was wondering if you were going to mention listening, because actually Jeremy and I were having another chat in preparation for meeting with you today. And one of the things that we both agreed were sort of one of the most unexpected gifts of doing podcasts and of hosting podcasts was that we have learned and improved our listening skills. So maybe
Totally.
We're increasing in empathy too, Jeremy.
All right. I'm going to tell a short story on my way to a question, because it has to do with maybe not listening, but behavioral economics as a topic. When my wife and I were traveling to the beach with our kids this past year, the kids had their iPads and their headphones on. My wife decided to take a nap. So this was my opportunity to put on what I wanted to listen to. So I turned on Freakonomics, which I've already mentioned once in this podcast, and maybe Stephen Dubner will be paying me by the time this is over. And so I started listening to this podcast about the economics of roundabouts as opposed to traditional traffic intersections. And because I'm super nerdy, the topic itself was interesting, but like my wife wanted to stick ice picks in her ears when she woke up and like couldn't believe like this is what I was choosing to listen to. But even more interesting was the focus on the self-imposed obstacles that people have to change, even when there is proof, scientific proof, like this is a better way to do things. And so I think that this is a part of what you do, is show people this is a better way to do things. I know you've been doing it a particular way for 30 years, but let me show you that this particular thing is better and why. How do you help people overcome those obstacles?
The first thing is I've got a lot of empathy as a former practicing attorney for, what the day-to-day really is like for folks. By the way, there was also that Mythbusters episode where they tested whether roundabouts actually saved time and were safer. It was awesome. I wish we had more roundabouts. I think we all need to get better at making people comfortable with the idea of experimentation and providing the psychological safety to do that, and providing recognition for those who make that leap, and leveraging existing frameworks to operationalize new workflows. So individually, this kind of goes back to MC's earlier question as well. Lawyers can apply certain principles to increase emotional intelligence, specifically self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy. The industry is changing, but it's still fundamentally based on principles of human relationships, and understanding each other continues to be a crucial component. I don't think it's anything that people understand or absorb the first time they hear it, but kind of once you start thinking about it, once you start listening to more Freakonomics episodes, probably, you really start realizing that the human decision making is often not conscious, and often just providing, illuminating the mechanisms that are going on without people's understanding about their own decision-making processes is enough to really jumpstart a lot of action.
All right.
Yeah, it's not conscious and it's not rational necessarily.
Exactly.
All right, I think that leads us into a next topic, which is something that you have expertise in. It's something that I've heard about increasing frequency, and I think we've talked about a little bit here, is change management. So that's another term that may be new for folks. I know it's not something that I had really learned about until within the last 2 years. So can you tell us what change management is? And then I have some
Sure.
follow-up questions for you about it.
Sure. So, I mean, in a nutshell, change management is a focused approach to shifting individuals and organizations from their current state to a new one. So the process in the legal sphere is aimed at kind of helping legal professionals embrace changes to their current environment.
So we're talking about legal tech and implementing new technologies. I am sure that one of the obstacles that, you face when talking to law firms and saying, here's, something that can help you is there are literally thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars at stake if a new technology doesn't deliver as intended or as promised. How can change management work to help alleviate concerns or build a framework that makes people more comfortable with adopting new technologies?
I mean, that is an excellent question. I love when people ask me that because what I think is going on right now is that change management, while it is not new to the rest of the world in terms of industries, the legal industry has sort of recently discovered it, and it's like, and now they're kind of, these fast followers are thinking to themselves, oh, okay, yeah, we're adopting a new technology. We should tack on some change management, as part of the rollout and I always say you cannot start change management at the time of the launch of the rollout. It has to be something that is begun from the very beginning of even scoping or assessing whether or not to take on a particular initiative. If it's built in and you have a lens of the changes that are required and the obstacles, and why asking people to collaborate or work in different ways or adopt new tools may be threatening to them or freak them out in some way, then you are thoughtfully putting together if we're talking about tech rollouts, a tech rollout that is positioned to succeed at a much higher level of probability than if you just sort of hope for the best and don't think about the human element and the effort that's required from everybody. I mean, when I was doing change management consulting before I went to law school, we did change readiness assessments, and those took 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Of figuring out, talking to everybody from the C-suite down to the mailroom, like how do they do their jobs now? How do they feel about change? How do they feel about their so-called turf and their teams, and how identifying those folks that could be the evangelists for the change and kind of take it on as their own.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Complex.
Yeah, it is. And that actually it sparked a number of thoughts for me. One of them is that we, as I'll just speak from being in law firms, especially large law firms, are not particularly good with that overall kind of management anyway. And then when you put a layer of change on top of it, it just, kind of reminds everyone that we don't have MBAs and we don't look at things from that business sense. But I was just wondering if there's sort of a good analogy for change management in terms of when you as an individual want to make a change. Let's say you want to lose weight, it's the New Year's resolution or whatever, you might hire a coach, right, to help you with that, or even to help you in your career, and an executive coach to help you make that change and stick to it. And it sounds to me in some ways like when you're talking about change management at an organizational level, you're talking about a team or a coaching for the organization as a whole in terms of making changes and moving forward and what's appropriate for the organization and the people who are part of it. Is that kind of a good analogy, or am I
Oh
just
yeah,
okay?
it really is. And you're swimming upstream in an industry
Yeah,
that's based on precedent. So
correct. Correct.
acknowledging that is probably the first step.
Yes, exactly.
But there are folks that are continue to be curious and motivated in every environment. So
Yeah, and that's actually another question I had, which was, um, you were previously at Denton's with this sort of legal tech innovation aspect to Denton's, and I've noticed that a lot of, well, not a lot, but there are a few very large firms or even boutique firms that have caught on to having their own, independent arm that develops new tools in legal tech, or works with innovation in that space. And I'm just wondering, just where do you think that interest comes from, and how successful has that been so far? Do you, writ large? I'm not saying specifically with regard to Denton's.
No, totally. I mean, writ large, I can tell you, we were the first entity in that space, and everybody thought that we and Denton's were nuts to put,
I remember that
multi-year like R&D funding towards an initiative like this. That being said, I mean, the leadership was, realized that change was coming, it was imminent, and rather than just let it happen, that there was an opportunity to sort of shape and own and drive it. Since our launch 6 years ago, we have tracked about 40 similar types of entities that are kind of attacking innovation. I mean, I would say that where is that coming from? Number one, clients RFPs are increasingly asking about innovation initiatives and becoming more and more savvy in the types of questions that they're asking about, specific tools and ability to collaborate.
Yeah, right.
Value add,
Exactly. And it can be a retention thing with a client. If you have a proprietary thing that only your firm has, they're going to lose that if they go to another firm.
Right. And I think, firms are starting to think about, the smart ones are starting to think about differing, more and different incremental revenue streams. Because if you diversify where the money's coming in from, that's obviously a good business decision to at least explore. So I think, I have heard mixed results. I think there's also a lot of this innovation washing going on, where partners at a firm who are ultimately responsible for, and most firms, right? Not speaking totally globally, but are the ones that are responsible for deciding whether or not initiatives like this will be funded and expanded. I think that to those that are forward thinking, they realize that there are new and different ways that you can approach the practice and business of law and collaborate with your clients in new and different ways, and provide and differentiate. Moreover, I think there's also always probably going to be that set of folks that think that if you hire an innovation professional and you put a press release out that you've hired that individual, that the job is done.
Right.
A lot of them don't have the clout or the budget or the team that they need to actually effectuate the change that they're sort of being tasked with. So I think there's a fair amount of flux still happening, but I think we're all driving in the right direction ultimately.
Yeah, for me, I think it's interesting because the big firms seem to be doing it. There's a few boutiques that are doing it, but it's largely in the larger firms. And it feels to me like there's opportunities for smaller firms to engage in that, and they haven't yet done it. And for the reason that you're talking about, it could be more nimble. If you get the kind of buy-in that you need, you only need to talk to a few people about whether they're going to do that or not, and move forward on a vision for something. There seems like there could be something there.
I totally agree. And in fact, that's something that I always encourage people to not forget about, because in the legal tech world, at least, in the last couple of years, it's really been focused on B2B and these kind of big enterprise sales. And when I'm talking to legal tech entrepreneurs, I always make the case that they need to be looking kind of at smaller entities because in many cases they are more nimble. They haven't locked themselves into 5-year extremely expensive contracts with a dinosaur type of solution where there are upstarts that are doing much better. And so those kind of getting market traction by approaching that sector of the market is always a good idea to explore.
Yeah.
All right, a lot of this podcast has focused on ideas. And so for a minute, I want to focus on you and your career. You have been an agent for change and are continuing to be. Is that something that you always saw yourself as doing? Or was there a moment, some transcendent moment where you're like, I want to be a person involved in change and pushing things forward? How did that develop for you?
I wish I could say that I meant to do it this way. That would be a much more impressive story. But I mean, I started out like we talked about with an academic background in behavioral science and organizational psychology, really focusing on how groups influence each other and adapt to new patterns and how groups influence the individual. I mean, that initially led me to change management in consulting and technology. But I mean, I got that background because I was fascinated by how people think, Then I went to law school to continue developing my skills, in an arena where I thought I felt I could have a broader social impact. I practiced for several years just as legal tech was beginning to gain traction. And, we're sitting there, deploying and maximizing technology to streamline these very labor intensive processes. There's ever increasing, deluge of data, high risk of human error. And I became really intrigued by how technology could improve, results for clients and let lawyers really spend time on strategic tasks and ultimately do the kind of work that everybody went to law school to do. And no one goes to law school to sit in a windowless room and do doc review, right? So I also decided at that point that I didn't really, want to be a partner in a law firm. So I eventually made the leap over to the legal tech industry. And I worked for, in product management, product marketing roles for businesses, targeting these various aspects of the business or practice of law. And then when Next Law Labs was launched, I immediately recognized the opportunity to really bring together all these threads of my experience in a groundbreaking effort. And they, only in retrospect does this whole career path make sense. But, I'm working now with a few different companies and firms. But the work is, and all of these kind of different threads of my experience are still very germane to what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jeremy. I know, and I were talking as well that sometimes it exactly what you said in terms of when you look back, you go, oh, of course, obviously I would be here doing this, given all the threads of my experience. And in fact, this is the perfect place for all of my skills. But at the time, it's really just one step at a time.
Yeah, like this looks interesting. I'll go over here now, kind of thing.
I had a question for you too about legal tech because I'm not sure that we're, maybe people would be operating from the same definition or sense. When you talk about legal tech and at different points of time, maybe it's different. When you say legal tech, what types of companies are you referring to?
Well, that's a great question because the tent is ever increasing.
Correct. Correct.
When Next Law Labs was started, there were 75 self-described legal tech startups, and they were predominantly in the e-discovery and information governance space.
Right.
Just because that was getting hairy, before anything else. In the last 5 years, it's gotten to like 3,000 or 4,000 companies. And a lot of the, I think there are a few different segments. There's the obviously B2B. There's the ones that are trying to just basically streamline and improve and automate in some situations, workflow and collaboration. increased collaboration amongst remote teams or with clients and experts and that kind of thing. So, you know, there's the tools that are trying to help lawyers do their jobs more easily, efficiently, lower risk, more with, less pain involved. Then there's the subset of direct to consumer types of legal tech. And then kind of overlapping very strongly with that is justice tech, which is kind of the essentially legal tech with a social impact focus, whether it be in the direct to consumer space, helping folks that don't have access to attorneys, or whether it be, solving problems that have to do with the courts, the court systems, or, making your way through pro se. So
yeah, and that's the newest area, really, is
yes,
that,
it is.
I think.
That's my current area of excitement myself. So
Oh yeah, no, it's interesting. That's very different from the others, because the others are through attorneys, and that's dealing with people who may not be represented and helping them navigate the court system. There's an outfit out of UK called Crafty Counsel, and they started putting together, from at least a UK perspective, and from the in-house lawyers' input, what they call alternative legal service providers, kind of trying to break them down into the different kinds of categories. When we say alternative legal service provider, what are we talking about, and what does that tech look like, and which areas do they operate in? If you haven't seen it, it might be interesting. They've done like an ALSP circuit board with input from the in-house counsel about what they view as being this tech that works for them.
Yeah, I know them well, actually. They're a great organization, and I think they're filling an incredibly important gap.
They are, yeah. It's so interesting.
I'm hoping they expand.
Yeah.
All right, I want to bring this back around to you and something you said a minute ago, that you decided you didn't want to be a partner in a law firm. And I've heard in my conversations on this podcast, several people have said it. And one of the questions that I have when people say that is, was there a mental or emotional hurdle for you in reaching that conclusion and then acting on it after, all the years of law school, all the years of practice, and then you have this idea of, maybe I want to do something else, but I have all of this time and sweat equity built into this thing. Am I going to walk away from it? What was that like for you?
Well, I mean, it's not anything unusual, I think. In fact, it probably started when I was a paralegal, before I even went to law school. And then I saw the partners working 7 days a week, and sharing with me, the challenges involved in being away from any other aspect of your life most of the time, except when you were asleep, which wasn't happening as often as it should anyway. Right. So, then I decided I wanted to go to law school regardless. And I think that, and I knew deep down that I was never going to be happy working in an environment like that, but there's tons of other ways to be a lawyer. Right. So, and in fact, I was, even at that point, not sure that I would use my legal degree as a practicing attorney, but I just felt like it was, the best next move for me. So,
so you walked in knowing, like, this isn't a long haul thing for me.
No. I thought it was a possibility, but I just didn't. I knew there were other options out there, and I thought I would explore those as well. And I figured it won't be a waste of time, even if I don't use it, and I go into policy or something. Having a JD is something that will make people listen to you, more. So, then when I was practicing, I found myself kind of getting sucked into that cycle. That everyone kind of talks about, which is, that pressure of billable hours, and and not only that, but kind of looking around and seeing, like, what does getting ahead mean, and where what does it mean to me, and what does it mean if I stay here? And I think that for me also, I became a parent right as my legal tech career was just starting to take off, and very different priorities just came into sharper focus for me. And, and we were able as a family to make a decision that, that was the way we wanted to go. And we just wanted to have a more well-rounded existence at the end of the day.
I think that's really wise. And it's one of the things that I have thought about and talked with folks about a lot over the last couple of years is defining success for yourself and what that means and what it doesn't mean. And, eliminating the things that it doesn't mean and figuring out how to get there and achieve, your ambitions. Because I think a lot of people within law firm cultures see ambition as a very one path thing, when the truth is I can be ambitious about other things other than this traditional law firm structure and business path. And that doesn't make me non-ambitious or, to want to do it in a different way. And I think that that's really important.
I mean, totally. And right now is a great time to be a lawyer, in terms of being able to figure out, there's so many more, lawyers can leapfrog the drudgery of this cookie cutter legal work that used to define those early, associate years, and, keeping track of countless signature pages and spending long hours at the printers and, everything. And you can gain earlier substantive experience in higher value work. And then you don't even, the options for leveraging legal training are just, were just unimaginable a few years ago. And so what I'm hoping is that the word gets out about that, and we start attracting more and more kind of diverse thinkers like that to applying to law school in the first place. We need more folks like that, in the industry.
Well, you are clearly one of those people. And if people want to follow you, connect with you, see what you're doing, where's a good place for them to do that?
Oh, I'm all over LinkedIn and Twitter. My handle on Twitter is Markovich Maya. And you can find me on LinkedIn, and I love when people reach out to me if they're interested in talking about anything, anything sparks their interest. And I hope the three of us can keep talking too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you both so much for having me. This was great.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. And thank you, Jeremy, for allowing me to join your podcast as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please take time to rate and subscribe at whatever podcatcher you're listening on. And if you want more from me, you can find me at jeremywrichter.com. You can also find me on Twitter at RichterJW. And if you want the extra audio and benefits available at Patreon, you can become a patron at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.